The surface of the sun has fired off 3 of the most powerful solar flares of the year in just 24 hours and promises to unleash more solar storms over the next several days. The active sunspot went into overdrive on Mother's Day when it erupted late Sunday night with an X-class solar flare, the strongest type of solar storm possible. NASA says this in the update. The first eruption registered an X 1.7. We were lucky it wasn't any really bigger than that. Then another more powerful 3.2. In just a moment, Stan Deyo talks with us about these solar flares and X flares. As we have talked on this program before, a big one that hits us directly could take out the power grid for years. As a matter of fact, William Forstchen, who's a noted author of 1 Second After, says in his report that a big solar flare or EMP pulse, which is caused by a nuke in the atmosphere, could take out 90% of the people in the course of a year. Stan Deyo, of course, research physicist and noted author. He has incredible expertise in Earth changes, climate controls, and here he is back on Coast to Coast. Stan, how are you?
Good, George. Good. How are you doing?
Okay, I'm fine. You know, I was just talking yesterday with William Forstchen, who's written the book 1 Second After, about EMPs, whether solar or nuclear. And here we go with a very active sun. I haven't seen the sun pop 3 X flares so quickly, Stan, in a long, long time. I can't remember it.
No, it is kind of unusual. I know that during the solar maximums, the sunspot maximums, that you're going to get about 3 CMEs, solar flares per day, but they're not like in the X class that we're talking about. These are impressive, and if you've looked at the videos that Soho's got and some of the other space weather stations on the internet, you'll see that the flare is very impressive, and it blows out on the other side of the sun just a few hours after one side erupts, on the other side of the sun it erupts, and this is quite interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more here shortly.
We've been lucky so far, Stan. We've been dodging the bullet. Now, granted, a 1.7 to a 3.2 X flare is big, but it could be worse. It could be a 10 or 15. But eventually, one of these are going to face us directly. The sun's going to shoot one right at us. The grid could go down. And as I've talked with so many people about this before, the grid could go down for years if it's the big X flare and it faces planet Earth the right way.
Sure it could. The Carrington event, which was a solar flare, which probably was accompanied by coronal mass ejections, this was back in 1859, they've estimated that to be about an X-28 versus, the 3.2 we just saw today. Now, they can go up to an X-45. We did have one in 2003, I think. It was up around a 45 to 48, X-45, I think it was. And that's, what is that? That's about 15 times stronger than this one we're seeing today.
And that's the one where it went off the side of the sun, wasn't it?
It was a graze, yes.
Okay.
If it had hit us direct, we'd have had a big problem. Back in 1859, when Richard Carrington, I think was his name, when he determined that we had a solar mass ejection, coronal mass ejection, and the flare hit the Earth. At that time, we only had telegraph stations that were electric, and some of the operators got electric shocks. It didn't kill them or anything. They were just uncomfortable. But it certainly caused fires along the telegraph lines where it shorted to the ground in areas that were flammable, and so they had fires along the telegraph lines. But look at today. I mean, we've talked about this on the show a lot of times before. If we were to have something like that hit our magnetic field and generate surges of high voltage on our power grid, just the power grid alone, that's going to cause arcs to ground through all places, all along the grid on the Earth, whether it be in Russia, the United States, or China, or whatever. And it's going to start fires everywhere. So many of them that we couldn't probably put them all out. Plus, it's going to cook, our computer chips. And how much do we depend on electronics and digital stuff today?
Everything. And we don't have the equipment, the backup equipment, Stan, to get the power up and running again if the grid goes down.
Well, yeah, we don't. We don't make it here in this country. We buy most of our transmission generators and transformers from China, and it takes about 2 to 3 years to build these things if they did nothing else but do that. So in the meantime, what are we doing for power? This thing here that we saw today is putting out a stream of energy that's lagging behind it, and I'd say that it will probably hit us tomorrow, the next day, just the edges. I would like some small particles not aimed directly at us. But if it were aimed directly at us, we'd be looking at particles traveling at more than 3 million miles an hour. And if it goes to an X45 value or above that,
oh my God,
you're looking at 6 million miles an hour. I mean, this is huge. A satellite, like the space station or our communication satellites, they will orbit around 17,500 miles an hour just around the Earth. And so when you talk 93 million miles from the sun, you're looking at, here, let me just calculate, you're looking at 5,500 times that speed hitting. I mean, a grain of sand in orbit hitting our space station at 17,000 miles an hour will put a hole in it.
It sure would. And imagine this, Stan. First of all, you know how dependent we are on now electricity, ATMs, the water source. I mean, the pumping plants send water to our house. We may think there's no electricity in our house connected to the water. That's not true. The pumping stations are sending the water. That's what builds up the pressure to allow us to have water in our homes. Everything goes down. We only have, I'm told, in particular cities, 3 to 4 days supply of food before they then need to rely on the trucks to bring in new food that stock the stores. We'd be up a creek.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of the cars and trucks today that are made have electronic ignition, and should those get compromised by an EMP, which can come from a coronal mass ejection or a nuke at altitude over the country, the trucks won't be able to move. They won't be able to bring the food in.
It's been reported that $50 billion could insulate the grid, maybe 75% of the grid around the United States. It's worth that kind of money, considering the trillions of dollars they waste on the bailouts and everything else, Stan. Why don't they do that?
I think that the planners, if you want to talk conspiratorially, I think that the world government, the New World Order, wants to destroy the American public. They're doing everything they can to bring our country down and out. So common sense would say to do exactly what you suggested. Let's not give bailouts to companies that are just throwing it overseas or wasting it. Let's put it into infrastructure rebuilding of not only electronics and power distribution, but bridges and roads and stuff that we depend on all the time. But no, that's too much common sense for what's happening now. They want to bring us down.
Do you agree it's not a matter of if, but when we're going to get hit?
Yes. Look, the experts in this field, that work for NASA and JPL and stuff like that, they are saying that by 2020, which is next 7 years, they expect us to get hit with a Carrington-type event, a direct strike. It could be, in this solar cycle, this solar maximum between now and 2015 sometime, or it could delay until the next solar cycle. But, we're going to get hit by that. And the sun is doing some pretty unusual things at the moment.
Sure is.
That's why NASA's called this the grand solar maximum, because we've never had it behave like this before. The sunspot numbers are down. They're below average
right
at the moment. But the stuff that it's letting off in these coronal mass ejections, these solar flares, that's intense. Now, a solar flare is different than a coronal mass ejection. A coronal mass ejection throws off protons and other energetic particles, which might take anywhere from about 17 hours to 2-3 days to reach us.
Right.
And they'll hit our magnetic field, go into the north and south magnetic field, poles of our field, down into the Earth, into the telluric currents, and it plays havoc with a lot of our stuff when it does.
And so people should understand, too, Stan, the CME itself, when it hits the planet, is not going to physically kill somebody. But if somebody's got a pacemaker or, again, the water goes down, the water sources go down, and you can't get food, that's how you're going to die.
There's an odd thing about coronal mass ejections. Back in the 30s and 40s, Dr. Scott Forbush, they called his discovery that he made back then about the sun, the Forbush decrease. And when you get coronal mass ejections, a heavy solar wind coming in like that, striking the Earth, what happens is it actually shields us from deep space gamma radiation, cosmic radiation coming from all over the universe at us. So we actually are shielded by the particles that are hurting us, or hurting our system, but we're getting the negative effects of that, but we're getting the positive effects in that it's shielding us and reducing the amount of cosmic radiation that actually reaches the Earth. It's an anomaly, but, it's you're getting a win on one hand and a loss on the other. And right now, our magnetic field is weakening.
Yes.
And NASA has even put on its site pictures of what a supercomputer generated as a model of what happens when our north and south poles start to reverse. They don't just flip over one night. They start to wobble, and they produce two other sets of north-south poles called mini-poles. And these float around inside the planet. At least that's what their model shows. Now, if we've got a weakened magnetic field, and it is intimately connected to the magnetic field of the solar wind coming from the sun all the time, if the sun starts burping out some pretty heavy pulses at us, you can see how that could be very dangerous and cause our own magnetic field to tumble and reverse.
Oh, boy, that's all we need. And, of course, the CME from the sun is one thing to worry about. Then also we've got the same kind of electromagnetic pulse in attack from a rogue nation that detonates a nuke high in the atmosphere. Stay with us. Stan Deyo with us. His website, StanDeyo, DEYO.com. Stan, sinkholes popping up all over the United States. They're everywhere. What's happening?
Well, George, it's an interesting question. We've been trying to figure out what the actual increase in sinkholes is. In the populated areas, we're seeing a lot more than reported than, when I was a kid 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
I didn't hear about such things. However, they did occur in parts of Florida and stuff due to natural groundwater, fresh water eroding some of the karst there and causing the things to collapse. But we're seeing them in China and various other populated places all over the planet. More and more so, people are becoming more aware of it, and they're making the news. So are we seeing an increase or not? I asked myself that several times, then I realized you can have natural erosion of these sandstones and various karst formations, which will collapse, and water will drain down through them and take soil with them, and that will be a sinkhole. That's normal stuff. Human activity, we build pipelines carrying water to various places all under our homes and buildings and cities. Now, what would cause those to suddenly start having sinkholes? It's when the pipes rupture or break. Is it because they're aging, or is it because they're aging and being pulled apart as the Earth's surface expands? And this is kind of what I'm wondering now. Since we're seeing it in the populated areas where we've laid all this infrastructure underground in pipes, that they're being pulled apart where they're not flexible, and they're leaking and eroding and causing the things to collapse. It's a sign more, to me, in that respect, of planetary expansion, which I think we're seeing starting to increase now with the earthquakes as well.
Well, you may be right there. I mean, it is, though, so evident that when these occur, like the one that swallowed up that poor guy in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
They're just getting bigger, aren't they?
Well, I tell you what, that was pretty spooky. I mean, he dropped down. They never found his body. The bottom of his bedroom dropped out, and he was gone. I mean, boy. Yeah, and they're getting bigger. I mean, look out there there's in California, Northern California, they're just, I think it's northeast of San Francisco, in that Clear Lake community there. There's a clear lake there that's right next to that volcano, and the volcano is dormant, which doesn't mean it's extinct. It's just dormant, not active, except that it's putting gases out from underneath that lake bed at the bottom of it, and the gases are noxious. They have warning signs all along the lake, don't go there, and here all these homes are, and they're starting to collapse, because of water intrusion. What's causing this? Is it the hot water's been eroding underneath their homes? I mean, personally, I would never have built a home there on the side of a volcano like that anyway, but because it is active as far as producing heat and gas in the lake there. But that's all part of the San Andreas Fault going, right on up the coastline and up into Alaska and down to Baja. And that you can look at the maps and see that area is potentially very dangerous for earthquakes and subsidence, especially by a lake with a volcano sitting on it. But that's a sinkhole of types, of a type, which is much bigger and is hitting a whole community. we're going to see more of these. I'm pretty certain.
Yeah, I think so too, Stan. Let's take a few calls here. East of the Rockies, Scott in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Welcome to the program. Hi, Scotty.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing.
I want to discuss with you, you said earlier about there being, 3 to 4 days worth of food in every grocery store?
Yes, before there's a run. Yes.
I've been a butcher for 25 years, worked in grocery stores for 25 years. That may have been the case up until the early mid-'90s, but now you'd be lucky if there's a day and a half's worth of food.
You mean less than more? Oh, my gosh.
I mean, much less.
Oh, my gosh.
And it all started with the changeover from warehousing, from where the stores used to get there, to they changed the name to distribution centers, which meaning that there's an 8 to 12-hour turnover time for the food.
Oh.
So meaning, say it comes from a major food producer to the warehouses and then to the stores, it doesn't sit in any warehouses more than 8 to 12 hours, and then it's back out again.
So now it's even scarier than what I thought, Scott.
Well, yes, absolutely. But yours isn't the only place I've heard this, and I did want to make sure that there was an emphasis on this, is that, like I said, best case scenario, there is a day to a day and a half's worth of food. And you can find that easily enough. Is anytime you're in a grocery store, just ask what's in the back. If they have this, that, or the other.
There's nothing there, is there?
No, there's nothing. The stores don't warehouse anything anymore, but neither do the larger chains that own the stores. They don't warehouse anymore either.
See,
the food is sitting at Kraft. The food is sitting at Del Monte. The food is sitting in the major producers.
When I was 16, I used to be a stock boy, 16 to 19 years old, back in Detroit. And we had this back room that had everything there. I used to remember uncrating boxes of cereal, and that stuff was back there for at least a week or two, but that's a long time ago.
Right, exactly. And like I said, it was that way up until mid-'90s maybe. But since then, absolutely not. That food comes through, it's 12-hour processes.
All right, thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. Stan, the number of 90% could die during a complete out of the grid. The grid goes down. Do you think that's too high, 90%?
Well, I think what they're trying to project, I don't think it's too high under certain circumstances, because you look at how much of our population has been crowded into a high-density living in the New England states, mainly in the eastern side of the United States. And if you interrupt their food supply for, let's say, 2 days, like Scotty was saying, then these people are going to turn on each other to steal food. They're going to get hungry. And
yes, they are.
They're probably not going to want the insects. They're going to want real food. And they will take it from each other. And in the process, they will create dead bodies and disease. And the rampant spread of disease in a case like that would be, very fatal to a lot of people. So 90%, well, that would be the coastlines, the east of the Mississippi, and west of the Colorado Mountains over into, California, Oregon, Washington. Those areas would be hit very hard by this. The people need to prepare for this kind of stuff, whether it be a storm knocking out your power, like a regular thunderstorm, whether it be a solar storm, whether it be a nuke, EMP, whatever. How many times and how many guests have you had on here telling people, get yourself prepared? There's information on all kinds of websites, information books like Holly's written, that Dare to Prepare.
Dare to Prepare, which is, I think, the Bible of preparing.
Well, it certainly is, and it's written to explain to people in common talk, what you need to do and why, and how to start a little bit at a time, so it's not a big project. But if you do that, then you're not going to be among those that are the victims of something like this. And I think more likely it's going to be war, nuclear war, and terrorist attack here that's going to cause our problems rather than a coronal mass ejection. I could be wrong, but I think initially it's going to be over that situation in the Middle East where... You
may be right there.
People just... If you just do like we used to do 50 years ago and prepare for, disasters, whether it be getting fired, not having money, or, to eat, but you've got food and water you've stored away, that's better than having shares in some stock. It's just common sense.
Yeah. Let's go to Visalia, California. Janice is with us. Hi, Janice.
Hi, George. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
Good. I just want to call and thank you for everything you do for everybody.
Oh, you are welcome. That's it? Yeah.
Well, no. I think
okay.
you're a wonderful person.
All right. Go ahead.
And I think you have a wonderful laugh.
I do have a nice laugh sometimes, but go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank you for everything you do.
Okay, you're very welcome. Very welcome. There you go. Nice person there, Stan. How about that?
That is nice. Good to get that positive feedback.
Sure is.
It's easy for people to complain, but you don't hear from the people that like it most of the time.
The 1959 Carrington event, which took out the telegraph, as you mentioned, which cooked the wires and everything else. Of course, they didn't have to rely on electricity and power. If we were to get hit with a huge X-flare and it takes out the grid in the dead of winter, when it's 10 degrees or 0 degrees in some states, those people are out of luck. What do? We can't house that many people.
No, and even these alleged FEMA, help camps to help people, survive these kind of things, even if that was really what they were for, there's not enough of them. And James Lee Witt, back, 10, 15 years ago when he was the director of FEMA, said, look, we don't have the resources. We will not have the resources to help everyone. You've got to prepare for yourselves, your homes, your business, your counties, your cities. You must do this because the government just doesn't have the resources to reach everyone in a major disaster, especially if two of them hit at the same time. So it just underlines the fact, get ready, because we are living in turbulent times, threatening times, and with the situation in Syria, Damascus, and Israel striking there, it's going to make Russia organize terrorists to hit the United States, because Russia can't afford to have America at its back supporting, Israel, with nukes and stuff. Russia is going to want us deactivated as a major world power. That means that as we approach the summer, October, November, maybe that late, there's going to be an eruption of, if not the threat of, nuclear war in the Middle East. And that means the United States is going to get hit with terrible internal terrorist attacks and probably nukes. We've just got to face this. And if we're going to get through this, we need to group together and have meetings like a lot of people are doing all over the country. They're called prepper societies and whatever, and they make fun of it on TV. But if you go to these meetings, you'll see people that are just everyday, ordinary people doing their best to take care of their family and their community and working together to prepare. And that's the positive solution. This is, I don't want to lay down and say, oh, well, I'm just going to die. We're trying to preserve this country, what's left of it.
And yeah, you're right. Let's go to Dave, Seattle, Washington. Now we'll go to Dave in Loon Lake, Washington, west of the Rockies first. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, thanks very much for taking my call. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Stan, my question is, do you believe in the expanding Earth theory, and do you think that maybe some of these sinkholes may be a symptom of that? And I'd like to add, there seems to be a volcano that's becoming active in the North Pacific near the intersection of two plates, and do you think that that's possibly related to expanding Earth, if you indeed believe that?
Well, I do believe that. I mentioned it just briefly earlier in the program. The Earth is expanding. There's no question about that. It does take major leaps of that expansion, and I think the last major expansion was back in the first kingdom of the kings of Egypt, the pharaohs of Egypt, and that's going back, several thousand years ago. But the Earth used to be at least 25% smaller in diameter than it is now, and that there was one of the pharaohs that was mentioned in Velikovsky's work about the Earth in upheaval, where the pharaoh complained and had his scribes write it down, that the Earth was moaning and groaning. When will this stop? And comparing it to the Old Testament records of the time, We think that was during the time of a guy named Peleg, which in Hebrew means time of the dividing, the splitting of the continents, when that occurred. So they were both reporting the same event. But now we haven't seen evidence of this, any time in recorded history now, after that fact. But I think that we're about to see it happen as the planet ages, as all stars, galaxies, planets age. They expand and throw off shells eventually. This may be starting now, and certainly I think it could explain increases in earthquakes because of tectonic pressures building up in various places, and because of stretching, which reduces the cohesiveness of the surface so that where it could support cavities before and have stuff built on top of it, it can't any longer. Yeah, I agree with that. And by the way, are you still there?
He's listening on his radio still.
Okay. I was wondering where he was putting that volcano in the North Pacific. I have been seeing some thermal activity there on the maps that I generate every day. But for the last week, I've been having trouble. One of the satellite data streams is down. But I was seeing something up there that was hot under the seabed. And I don't know if that's the one he was talking about or not. Do you know which one he was talking about?
No, but the one near the Canary Islands is La Palma, right?
Yeah, that's over in the Atlantic.
Right.
And I have been keeping an eye on that. And
I don't know about the one of the Pacific.
Yeah, I didn't know about that one. But other than that, the heat source, I think, may be a volcano. And we might be seeing some of that over in the Mid-Atlantic range as well, which is west of the Canaries.
Let's go to Dolores in Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to the program. Hi, Dolores.
Hi, I've got a quick question
for
Stan Deyo.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about hardening the power grid for the United States. Why would it not be possible, even though it may be a little complicated, to harden your circuit breaker box where the power comes into your house?
Well,
you're still not going to get the power.
Yeah, you got to have the power. You might be all right, but the grid will go down.
And you'll have no power in your house. Simple as that. So, I mean, insulating your circuit breaker would be good for short fuses and things because you don't want your appliances to burn out or anything. But if the grid goes down and you don't have power for a couple of years, it doesn't matter, does it, Stan?
Well, not only that, you've got things in your home that are, radios, computers, electronics, mass ejection that generates an EMP along with it, or a nuclear strike that does it. It's not going to matter whether you've got power or not because your devices won't work. They'll have been shorted out. And you're looking at years of rebuilding if you can, put industry together again to manufacture stuff.
Now, if the planet is facing the sun and a CME hits it, what about the countries that are on the far side of the planet that aren't in direct alignment? Are they okay or they still get zapped too?
It depends on a number of factors. One of the major factors is the angle at which that coronal mass ejection hits the magnetic field of the Earth, how we're tilted at the time. It's the z-axis of the magnetic field. But if it hits just right, it'll hit all the planet because it will put surges through the Earth currents. They're called telluric currents, which will maybe be 25% weaker than the sun side of the planet, but it will still surge on the other side of the planet. It might not be as bad, depending on grounding and various other factors, but there's just no free ride on something like that hits us. A halo coronal mass ejection that would come straight at us is going to be problematic everywhere.
Let's go to Jesse, Anchorage, Alaska. Get you in here, Jess. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, George?
Good, Jesse.
All right. Well, I just had a couple questions for your guest there. I was wondering if there's anything you could do, like, say, disable the battery on your vehicle or something like that, and then leave out the vehicle for a little while after solar flare or something like that, or that magnitude would happen. And then also the fact that I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and the city is basically built on a swamp. And we also have volcanoes. I heard you talk a little bit about volcanoes, and we've had a little bit of activity up here last day or two. And I was just wondering if your guest...
Well, what do you think, Stan, about the fact that where you live geographically really doesn't matter, does it?
No, there'll be more problems in areas like he's talking about than others. But every area where you could live, in occupied land masses, is going to have some sort of problem. You just have to learn to deal with the potential problems and the problems that you know about in those areas. With a coronal mass ejection, or like an EMP pulse, which comes from the sun or from warfare, you can build shields for smaller equipment like metal cans that are well grounded. You hook a wire to them down into the earth. You can do the similar things with vehicles. Some of the older vehicles before I think it's 1975, isn't it, George? What's before they started using computers in all the cars? Anyway, those that were built pre-computer ignition, those will be fine. The ones that have computers in them, you're going to have to try to shield them, maybe ground the body to the earth somehow, and hope that it bypasses, or put it into a Faraday cage you make out of wire mesh. These things will help. And if you do survive one EMP, somehow you got warning that it's coming, and I don't know how that would happen, but if you got warning and you had your stuff in shields and they survived, okay, you take them out of the shields, it's over, you're using them again. Do you get the warning the next time in time to save it?
That could be. Stan Deyo, thank you so much. We'll keep monitoring this. Again, the biggest solar flares of the year erupting from a very active sun. So far, we've been lucky. It's not over.